Good morning, guys. Thank you for taking time out of your day to let me pick your brains on this topic. You guys are all Enneagram type fives, and I wanted to interview each of you to ask you how your personality type interacts with your creative process. So to begin, I'd like to have you guys go around, introduce yourself, and what art you are involved in. So whoever wants to go first, you can go first.
I'll go first.
All right.
My name is Rebecca, and I do a number of different art mediums. I draw, I do a lot of writing and poetry, and I also do photography.
All right.
I'm Stephen Bailey, and my creative medium is typically through writing, researching and writing. And today I'm going to be talking about how I make lesson plans.
All right.
My name is Cillian, and I sing and I draw, and I'm also learning to play the guitar.
That's awesome. All right. First up, what does your creative process look like when you are creating your art? So we can go through the same order, and we can go with Rebecca first. What does your creative process look like when you are making your art?
I think it depends. I feel like there's kind of two main branches of process. One is like intentional, and the other one is more inspired. There's sometimes when I just feel like there's something happens in my life where I have to create in order to like either understand it or just get it out. And if I don't, I'm like end up in this weird like headspace or like emotionally, mentally. And so something happens either inside me or externally, and I just feel inspired to create something.
Interesting. So it's like your way of processing what's going on in your life.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other way is more intentional, where I've like set up guidelines and structures. So like one time I did where I wrote every day, like a poem every day for 30 days. Or I have like a running list of notes on my phone that I just keep track of things throughout my day or throughout my week. If something happens, I have a conversation with someone or whatever, and I'll kind of jot that down, and then I'll revisit that later to try and flesh it out into something more. Or as far as like photography, I'll see a location that I want to shoot, and then I'll set up the shoot around the location. So that's more intentional, more like thought out.
That's cool. That's nice. Excuse me. Like I particularly relate to like you said writing down notes after conversations with friends, and like that inspires something. And like so you do that in like your phone. You have like a particular like idea notepad.
I have one on my phone, and then I also have like a physical notebook cool. So if I don't have the notebook with me, I have somewhere on my phone. But usually I'll have the notebook, and I'll just like kind of jot stuff down. Yeah. Or if I'm reading something and something jumps out at me, I'll kind of make a note of that.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Steven?
Weirdly enough, my creative process sounds and looks very similar to what Rebecca just said. Like there are moments of intentional creative process and then kind of like emergency creative process, and like when it comes to like, especially in my master's, when it came to emergency creative process, it was always like I had something due, and like there's kind of an element when I'm doing lesson plans that there's always something due. Like I have a class the next day. I need to make sure that this lesson plan is produced because this is my job. It kind of gets very formulaic sometimes, but then there's always like this like sweet spot of like this very intentional moment that I'll do with a lot of how I write my lesson plans, especially when I create the time and the space for it, that I like love to explore.
Yeah.
Specifically, I guess for me, again, like what Rebecca said, like I have folders upon folders in my iPhone filled with notes of different things that I've thought of or different writing prompts, or like I'll be at the gym and in between sets, I'll just like flesh out an entire like thought process and research and word studies, because I have all that on my phone nowadays, so I can do it. while I'm at the gym, and then my 1 minute break has turned into a 20-minute break, but that's another. But when it comes to lesson plans, typically when it comes to like the inspirational stuff, I'll be reading something by one of my favorite scholars, or I'll be examining the actual text, and then like I'll notice an anomaly, that'll put me down a rabbit hole, and then I'll come out the other end eventually, whether it's 1 hour or 7 hours later. And I'll come out the other end, and there'll be a part of me that immediately thinks, okay, can I teach this to my students somehow? Like this little tidbit, in fact. And part of my creative process that I do, like when it comes to like that, like the explosion of like creating the lesson plan, I always have to balance between, is this fact going to be relevant for their spiritual formation? Can it actually work in what their spiritual goal actually is, or can it not? And if it can't, then I have to put it to the side and it stays in the note. And maybe in a conversation, they'll find it interesting. But in the moments where it does work out, I'll always make sure that whatever fact I'm relaying does actually fit into the ultimate, like, students will be able to like skill learning statement. You know, otherwise they're just kind of like, they'll be like, well, Mr. Bailey told us this weird Bible facts. I don't know how it fits in the grand scheme of my life, but okay. You know, but usually when it comes to actually creating the lesson plan, it'll be a Saturday, because that's when I do all my updating and my lesson planning for the next week. It's always with a cup of coffee at hand. And then when I'm actually typing, I'll have music playing, but I don't like having lyrics when I type and when I research, because then I start to get sidetracked. I start thinking about what the lyrics mean rather than what the words on the page actually mean. So I'll typically listen to something with
instrumental.
Instrumental music. There's like worship instrumental, lo-fi beats, or just classical music.
Interesting.
And the creative process ultimately culminates when I actually get to deliver it, and it's like, I have to be brave for 90 minutes at a time.
What about you, Silly? What is the process for that for you?
When it comes to like songwriting, it usually just comes out of nowhere. Like when I say out of nowhere, it's not like I'm like sitting down, pen and paper. I'm usually like, can I be honest? Or
please be
I'm
honest.
usually like sitting on the toilet and a song will just come out.
That's the throne of creativity.
But like, so it's like, it just comes out of nowhere. But when I think about like when I'm creating, there's usually like a lot of pressure going on in my life and like in my head, and it's just like, okay, blah, and like it's a whole song.
It's just a poetic diarrhea that just
literally
comes out, right?
Oh my god, or like or it's a poem, or like so like when I'm drawing, it's usually like, it's bad because I usually do it at work when I'm supposed to be like watching kids.
Isn't
like,
it's not?
So like I work with preschoolers, so like sometimes we draw and like it's supposed to be 20 minutes, but I'm starting to draw something and it's like, big and it's prophetic, and I'm just drawing. They're like, Miss Celia, and I'm done. I'm like, keep drawing, and I'm like so focused because like once I start something, I just want to finish. You know? It's horrible. But like with my guitar, it's something that I'm learning and it's new, and it pisses me off because like I don't like that I don't know how to play it.
Interesting. That can be frustrating.
Right. And also I'm playing it in front of people. And it's just like you know, my siblings and my, you know, and it's just like they can hear me mess up. So those things bother me, but like that's kind of like my process. I like it usually just comes out of nowhere, and then I figure out, oh, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm thinking, and like, you know, it becomes itself before I can even like, you know.
That's fascinating. It does kind of that. It's crazy to see how ideas often like will grow and develop a life of their own, whether or not you work on them. It's like I'm gonna manifest. You can come for the ride if you want, but you know,
literally.
But and you mentioned something that you like, it bothers you when you don't know, like when you're not good at this and you're not able to like excel at it, and that kind of leads us into our next question. What is one of the biggest obstacles to your creativity? And we can start with Rebecca.
I feel like I definitely like get too stuck in my own head. So I'll start like overthinking everything and like doubting myself, and then I just like shut down. And then like nothing kind of can come out of that. I think another, like, kind of talking about silly learning how to play guitar, I think when I feel like I'm doubting myself, then I doubt if I even have the skill set to create. So I'm like, I'm not a good photographer. I don't know all the skills. I haven't taken enough classes, any classes. I haven't like done all of the things necessary to be as professional and like excel as much as I feel like I should. Or with writing, I'm like, is this even like coherent? This is childish. This is too simplistic, like all of this stuff. And so then I think I just start like kind of spiraling in my own head, and I get like tripped up on thinking I don't even have the ability to create what I feel like I am trying to inside. Like I feel like there's something that's trying to come out, and like my own humanity, almost my own like faulty physicality is like getting in the way of it. Yeah, I think comparing myself to other people also is a big obstacle. Anytime that I'm trying to create something and like maybe I come across something on like a blog or on Instagram or something, I'm like, oh my gosh, well they just did something similar and it's so much better. There's no way I could do that.
I shouldn't even try.
Yeah, exactly. I think, that idea that I'm like a fraud trying to be creative and, I'm not, so why even try?
Wow, that's really deep.
Yeah.
I'm a pretender. It's an imposter
definitely.
and I'll be exposed.
Yeah. I think just like more superficially, obstacles are just like time management. Balancing like work. Like I don't make money off of my art. Really, I sell stuff here and there, but it's not like my job. So I think prioritizing it can get tricky, where like I want to and I would love to be able to just sit there and like create art all day. But then I have like an actual job that I need to do, life things that I need. So carving out that space, and that's where I think in the first question, that intentional, like trying to set aside like goals and guidelines for myself to stick to is really helpful to kind of overcome that obstacle. Because if I'm like, oh well, I wanted to write like this many times in a month or whatever, then I have something tangible to stick to, and that kind of motivates me forward. I definitely am like goal oriented in that way, and I kind of have to set standards for myself to hit.
That's good. Did I hear you say that you've never taken a photography class? Is that what you said?
I never have, no.
That's crazy. Have you guys seen her pictures? You haven't?
I feel like I have like a while ago. But
you have a website, right, Rebecca?
I do. I do have a website. It's just my first and last name.com, RebeccaPriswara.com.
Yeah. She's really good. I'm surprised that's crazy.
Yeah, so I never took a class. I did work for a wedding photographer for like 2 years in college as like her assistant. So I feel like that was really good kind of on the job training.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've never taken like an actual like class.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation and stuff. Yeah. My brother's a photographer and he has a similar experience, like with classes. Anyway, next, Steven. What is one of the biggest obstacles to your creativity?
So honestly, largely like a performance anxiety sort of thing. Like for me, like I mentioned earlier, like I have to be brave and teach for 90 minutes at a time. Like teaching is always the scariest part. Like I love lesson planning, but I'm always terrified that what I'm going to present to other people is not going to be received. So like sometimes one of my creative blocks while I'm even trying to prepare the lesson plan is like, wow, this is not going to be received well. Or one of my critiques has been that, like I'll speak too complex, or what I have to say is like not easily understood. So often what I'm looking at in my lesson plan is like, because some moments I'll have actually scripted out one-liners that they need to take notes on. I'll have to review over and over again to make sure, okay, is this understandable at a high school reading level? So that feeling of incompetence really comes up, especially because I never got my degree in pedagogy. So I didn't come in knowing a list of different methods that kids can actually learn. I took 1 or 2 youth ministry classes that helped around that area, but it's not what my training is in. My training is in being a Bible nerd. So I come in with gusto and like passion over the topic and wealth of information, and somehow I pass by. I don't know how I'm still here, you know?
Oh, no.
But like, over the years, I've learned pedagogy bits and pieces, and experience really teaches you like what's well received and what's not, and how to get people together, you know? So it's been self-teaching at that, and I've gotten better at that as every year has gone on. But really that 90-minute period of time is the scariest part for me. Also, and I had a note of this, hold on. The second obstacle is that, especially specifically for what I teach, which is biblical theology, I have a wealth of information when it comes to Bible knowledge, in dead languages and like what scholars have written across the board. And one of the things I often forget is that I forget what it was like to have normal Bible knowledge, you know, because that was 7 years ago, and like 18-year-old Stephen Bailey is not the same as 25-year-old Stephen Bailey. Yeah. And I've been formed by these past 7 years of what I think and believe. So now I have to think back, okay, now not even what you thought at 18 years old, what did you believe about the Bible when you were 14 years old? And going back that far in time to think about what that 14-year-old me would need to learn about the Bible is often very difficult, because I have this huge wealth of information in my brain about like how to like improve biblical studies, which means like having to figure out like how to critique it, what's wrong with certain theories and whatnot. And I'm honestly like, the 14-year-olds just need to know Jesus is good and he is just and he is merciful and his love endures forever.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I want to like, but don't you want to learn the Hebrew?
Yeah.
And they're of course never there. I'm still waiting for an invitation.
Please, Mr. Bailey, teach us the dead languages.
That's what I'm at. I'm waiting for that. But that's the other roadblock, is that my creativity wants to overexpress itself and make it all about me. But especially in this atmosphere, it's not about me. So I have to force myself to make sure that I make it about them and what they need.
Yeah, that can be tough.
Yeah,
that's good though. It's a good way to articulate it. What about you, Silly?
I think one of the hardest things is sharing vulnerably. One of my worst memories is at NIAC when we were doing those open mics, and I did a poem about a dude that I stopped talking to, and I didn't realize that I had unprocessed emotions about it until I was doing the poem in front of everybody, and like I literally like started to malfunction, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is too deep. Oh my gosh, I have emotions coming out while I'm speaking. Oh my gosh, everybody's listening. It was so much. So like I literally paused, and like, you know how the crowd, you can do it.
Yeah.
So they do that, and then I finished the poem, and like years later, people are like, wow, that's still my favorite poem, and I'm like, I hate that moment. Like, it's so trash. So like that's one of my hardest things is having my creativity and my vulnerability come together, because I rather them separate. I rather just talk about the craft of it. I rather you talk about how you feel about it, and I can engage in conversations about that. But once you say, where did this come from? I'm just like,
that's not important.
Yeah. Fast forward. Like,
no.
Suddenly the walls come up.
Yeah. That's so intriguing. And that again, see, Silly smoothly transitions us to the next question, because creativity can often be so like very emotional, but fives are often described as being the least emotional of all the types. So how do your emotions show up, if at all, in your creative process?
Can I go first?
Oh, you are. Silly, you can go first since you.
Okay. I think it's funny because people keep calling me fours. Like for the past few months, people keep thinking that I'm a four, but it's just like, you're connecting to my art. You're not connecting to my feelings. You know, like, because I know how to verbalize, I think that's the word I'm supposed to use, properly. Like, I'm thinking about what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
They connect to those feelings. They think, wow, you're emotional. It's like, no, you're emotional. And so it's hard because people keep thinking I'm a four, and I'm like, yeah, sure, okay, fine. Like, for the sake of conversation, I'll be like, yeah, I'm a four. Oh my God. Right? but for me, it's kind of hard because like, especially when it came to like worshiping, a lot of things were bodily for me because I didn't know how to put my emotions. So it became something that like physically hurt me. Like, so like if I was like singing a song and I knew that this was a big moment, I'd get like, you know, the bubbles in my gut because it's just a hard process to go through. But yeah, so it's hard because people are defining me for me and not just letting me be, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. That can be very frustrating.
Yeah.
And I definitely see that. Like I thought we were for a little while confused if you were 4, I don't point 2, and now I think you just have a very, very heavy 4 wing, and you just like dip into that. But like you're very the way that you articulated being able to verbalize your emotions without actually being like overwhelmed by them, I think is very, very 5.
Very funny. Your wife, Yolanda, she was my PSF leader, personal spiritual formation leader. And like, I had to write my grief journal twice because she was like, how do you feel? I'm like, I wrote it. She's like, well, how do you feel? And I'm just like, oh, what do you mean how I feel? So like, there are still some people who can see through my words. Like, those are just words. You're not feeling any of this.
You're not fooling me. That's good. Yeah. How about you, Rebecca?
I think emotions show up for sure. I'm the complete opposite of what Celie was saying. People know I'm not emotional. People say I'm cold, I don't have a heart, or I'm cold-hearted. But then they read what I write or they see like what I create and they're like really confused.
Like,
they're like,
who wrote this?
But they connect to it, and then they're just like not really sure how to place the two. I think for me, that is my way of expressing my emotions through my art. I don't really cry. I don't really like, don't touch me, don't hug me. Like, keep that separate. But if I don't create, then it gets bottled up inside, and I'll just kind of like shut down emotionally. So I feel like it's my way of more like intentionally, intelligently, like thoughtfully expressing my emotions precisely, rather than just kind of like word vomiting them like other people will do who would be considered more emotional. Whereas me, I'm like, okay, something happened. Give me a minute. I'll get back to you in like 6 months. I'll process this then.
And well thought out.
Yep, and I'll create something, and then you'll be able to understand, and I'll be able to understand what I was actually feeling in that moment.
That's valid.
Yeah, so I feel like it's definitely like I need to create, and that process allows me to untangle my emotions. And then like fully form them and understand them. I think my emotions are just like really, 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 really deeply buried. So it takes super long to actually get down in there and pull them out and say, okay, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? Is this a valid feeling? Should I be feeling this way? And if so, what do I do with it? It's like separate from me. But then it's also still affecting me, unfortunately. So then I have to be like, okay, guess I have to deal with this.
Yeah, that's intriguing. Yeah. What about you, Steven?
It's hard because sometimes, like, for lesson planning, it doesn't involve me getting too reflective on me sometimes, or it doesn't get me reflecting into what I'm feeling. Sometimes, like, again, if I'm in the mode where I need to produce a result because this is my job, like I'm very like stone-faced, like, you guys have to do this with the Bible, like, and that kind of ends up being it. But when there's a moment where in my writing, I find like emotions are interfering or coming into play, there are 2 levels of it. The first level is that I'll come into this space where, like, in the moment while I'm typing it, I will logically know that this is what I feel about this one thing, and I'll type it out. And like, this has happened almost every single time that I've done this, but like, I'll type out what I know is like what I'm feeling about a subject, or what I feel, how I felt God's presence in my life. Cause a lot of what I teach involves of course, not just teaching the kids how to relate with God, like in a biblical manner, but also a spiritual manner.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to the spiritual manner, of course, that's when I'm connecting with God emotionally. Like sometimes it goes biblically, spiritually, but anyway, but like that's when I'm relaying the truth of God, and I'm relaying that from a personal perspective, because that's how they receive it best often. That's when I logically know, okay, this is how I feel about this, writing it out. This would be a good way to link it in. But what I often find is that when I'm actually having to connect with like I guess connect with my body out of my mind and actually present the material, I'll realize that something I might have talked about, like written down and wanted to relay about the truth of God, has a lot of emotional baggage behind it and might actually make me want to cry in that moment. And which is not good sometimes when you're teaching, but when you're teaching about Jesus, sometimes it is good that you cry.
Yeah.
So when I first started doing that, like I would just stop and say, okay, maybe I just shouldn't do this. And then in the future, I've regretted that. And then when that's happened, one instance that comes to mind is that I had this thing called Devo Dice, which is like there's an spiritual activity we do and then a Bible verse we pair up with it. So it might be forgiveness or praying for healing or like pair prayer or whatever. Like we roll that and then we roll the Bible verse, and that determines our Devo for the day. It's a fun way to get the kids like switching up like how we do devotions on the daily. And so one day I was praying for forgiveness, and the Lord's Prayer came up, and at the end of the Lord's Prayer there's this line that says like, if you don't forgive your brother on earth, how do you expect your Father to release forgiveness to you, in a sense? And like I realized that there was stuff about like some family members stirring up in me in that moment. I was like, oh, and Jesus was like, you have to release them if you're going to ask them to release their enemies.
Oh, yeah.
And so in that moment I was like, no, Jesus, this is not what I want to do, you know? And so, but in that moment of actually doing it, it opened up a good conversation on what it means to forgive and love your enemies.
Yeah.
And it was a moment where I logically knew, because like surprisingly the rest of the lesson had to do with forgiveness as well.
Yeah.
And it's like, I logically knew that this is forgiveness, and this is what you could talk about in forgiveness, and this is what I could talk about in forgiveness. But when I actually talked about forgiveness, like it was more engaged. It was like almost like a pathway to engaging my heart that sometimes I don't want to do. But I know, but like I logically know is good in the moment for the kids to see that it is okay to engage with where your heart is.
All right. Yeah. That's good to hear. Fives are in the fear triad on the Enneagram. So what is one thing that you're most afraid of when it comes to making your art? Rebecca, take it away.
I think it's kind of similar to what I mentioned before, like being considered inadequate or like a fraud. Like you're not, like I'm not actually qualified to create what I'm creating. Or if qualification doesn't really matter, then at least what I'm creating is not good, or people don't like it, or like whatever. So I think fear definitely does undermine a lot of, not so much what I create, or it's more like whether or not I share it or how I share it and kind of how I move forward with that. Because I would love to actually be more professional with it and start selling more consistently and like all of that. But I think that fear comes in of thinking I'm just going to fail if I try, and not wanting to engage with that. I just kind of like, well, you know, it's just a hobby. It's fine. But feeling that I do feel like I need to start moving in that direction. But that fear comes in of like just not being good enough.
Yeah.
In it.
Very real. Yeah.
Feeling like there's always more. What's that?
I said that's very real. Like that's that fear.
Yeah. So definitely like a competence. And competence to me is not just like meeting the standard. It's always like excelling. So even if I feel like, okay, like it's fine, that's like not enough. Like if I'm not performing at the highest level in that field, then I'm like, why am I even here?
Yeah. Understandable. Yeah. What about you, Stephen?
Kind of in that same vein. I'm always terrified of failing my students in some way, whether it's the information's too high or I didn't communicate well enough. there are some like in like some of my worst, like my worst brain days, I guess I should call them, like I'll be looking up programs across like the world on like secondary education, because I'll feel like if I just do this degree, I will achieve that competence, or I'll achieve that mastery to help these guys. Even though that would be a 2 years down the road sort of thing, there's still that hope in my mind that like at least the Steve in 2 years, because he has another master's degree, will definitely not fail his students. So I can ensure that for him, rather than like let him exist in the existence I'm living in right now. So I think that competence piece is really big, especially when I was in my master's. It was like, especially I was surrounded by so many brilliant people, like who study in biblical studies. Like there was always this inadequacy piece of like, oh my gosh, like I need to study more languages, or I need to study more of this, or I need to read another article, or I need to do that. Like there was always this absence feeling of I don't really have enough information. I don't have enough resources to excel the way that I need to.
Yeah. Silly?
My fear, how do I explain this? So I thought I was called to be like a Bible teacher. That's what I wanted to be. Like when I went to college, that was my plan. And then I started to sing and realized I was a worship leader. And then I got an internship as a worship leader again. And it was just like, oh snap. So people want me to do creative things. So my fear is like resting in that, because I'd rather just teach you. Let me just teach you the stuff. This is great. But it's just like, no, we actually want you to sing it. And so like the fear is, one, maintaining that, because that's more passion than it is knowledge. And there's a lot more that's in that
there's vulnerability there.
Right. And then the other thing is like, because I feel like a songwriter, one day I won't be able to maintain my own self. So like I may need someone to be my producer. I may need somebody to like help me. And so like just trusting somebody with my creative stuff is another fear that I have, because it's just like, what if you don't represent what I'm trying to say properly? Or what if you take advantage of what I'm trying to say, you know? So like, I think those are like the two biggest fears that I have.
Oh, that's really valid.
Yeah.
So in the last 4 minutes that we have left, you guys have said a lot of things that other creative fives will hopefully be inspired by and enlightened by. And so if you could say one thing that you would want to leave with other creative fives, what would it be? Rebecca?
I feel like patience with yourself is probably the biggest thing. It took me a long time to like learn that, to give myself time to process, because there's that pressure to, feel something and then speak about it, and giving yourself that space to have something happen, or to feel inspired, or to whatever, like have a triggering moment, and then actually produce whatever creative work you're going to produce. That space between those two, I think for fives, at least for me, is like really necessary to fully like pull it apart and understand it. And I feel like because there's so much depth in a lot of fives, it's not a lot of superficiality, it takes a lot longer to really plumb those depths and actually get down to the heart of things. And I would find myself getting frustrated and kind of hopeless, thinking I'm never going to get there, or there's too much to try to unpack. So I think being patient with yourself is really rewarding. You'll know yourself better, and others will benefit from it.
Stephen?
I would say be bold to share the intimate parts of your craft with people. Just because, like, at least for me, like, there's always this cyclical nature of like, is this actually good? Like, will people actually care about this? Like, did I produce something good, or is it just trash garbage? And I think having that outside person is good information for a five to realize that like this person that you really love, that is always there and like steady for you, is like looking at what you produce and saying, hey, this is good. And then they'll also give you the objective feedback to say, hey, I didn't understand what you meant by this, you know, or like what this means. Could you explain that for me? So like taking the time to be vulnerable about your work is a good thing to do, because it will help you be braver to like share it with other people beyond that. Because your information is already good with yourself, but if you share it with others, people get to like really understand how wonderful it is.
So for the last 30 seconds, Silly, what would you say?
To create in community. Like, I know that we like to be withdrawn and like to do things in isolation, but we're called to community, and there's a beauty in being that open and honest.
Yeah. So I hear be patient, be bold, and create in community. Thank you so much for all of that, for your time, and I hope that you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks.